But the other argument that we see is that even with this huge boom going on in Canada, and this is the reason why our economy is actually doing better than the U.S. economy because of the tar sands, is that it in no way has affected the price of oil. So here you have a paradigm to look at of what is being proposed right now with ANWR, what's being proposed with offshore, what's being proposed with shale. We can see it right now in Canada. And as this huge boom is taking place, the price of oil has gone up month after month after month. It has had absolutely no effect on the price at the pump.
We're talking to Naomi Klein. Naomi, you've been writing a lot on a number of issues. One of them is about what you call Obama's boys.
Obama's Chicago boys, yeah. I just want to add one more point, and I just want to take this opportunity because I feel like people are being so bombarded with these oil industry talking points, and it really is changing public opinion. I mean, people need to know this. There's polls are being commissioned that are finding that 67% of Americans support offshore oil drilling because they think it's going to lower the price at the pump. What's actually going on is the oil companies may not even bother drilling. What they're doing is they're stockpiling leases. And what that means is that the oil companies will have a much greater control over the oil supply. When the oil companies have a much larger control over the oil supply, they can turn it on and off. They can control price. They can fix the price. So in fact, what this is doing is the opposite of what they're saying. It's actually giving the oil industry much more power to drive the price of oil up by controlling supply, by just giving them all of these leases. And we keep hearing, well, they have all these leases already and they're not using them and they want more. Why? Why do they want all these leases? Because that is what gives them control over supply. That's what allows them to fix prices.
In fact, this has united you with people across the political spectrum. You've been invited on a number of right-wing radio talk shows because everyone is deeply concerned about the price of oil. They just have different solutions for what should happen.
But, you know, there was this little window, Amy, where even Bill O'Reilly was talking about the obscene profits of the oil industry. It was like 3 days where people were, where the logic of the situation was just so glaring, where you have Shell reporting $7 billion in profits in 1 quarter. People are very concerned about climate change, and it just makes sense to take some of those profits in the form of a windfall profit tax or some other measure, and because these are the companies that have created this crisis for us, and using this moment. And let's remember that this is what countries around the world are doing. They're using this moment of high oil prices to invest in alternative energy and alternative infrastructure. The way to make solar and wind work, is not just to do venture capitalism for startup solar and wind companies. These companies need major investment, need states to make major investments in infrastructure that can carry these new energy sources, new grids. This can only be done by the public sector. And this is actually a moment of opportunity when there is such high prices, when people are so angry at the oil companies, to actually take some of this money and invest it in the public sphere so that alternative energy becomes viable. And there was a moment where there seemed to be some agreement about that, even on the right. And then it just shifted because of this very aggressive barrage coming from the oil and gas industry, which is selling this false hope of drill now, pay less.
Naomi Klein, Obama's Chicago boys. Who are they?
Well, one of them is Obama. Obama spent 10 years teaching at the University of Chicago Law School, which is a very conservative law school. I wrote a column recently talking about how conservative Obama's economic roots are with his ties to the University of Chicago. His first response to the mortgage crisis, let's remember, was he was worried about the government taking action to keep people from being evicted from their homes because that would create moral hazard. And he was not talking about the big companies, the big mortgage lenders. He was talking about individual low-income people being thrown out of their homes. He was worried about moral hazard. That's a very University of Chicago take on the situation. And yeah, one of his chief economic advisor was Austin Goolsbee, who was a University of Chicago economist. now his chief economic advisor is Jason Furman, who is not a University of Chicago affiliated economist, but is certainly on the right of the democratic economic spectrum, has defended Walmart, has attacked critics of Walmart, saying that they're doing more harm than good, that actually Walmart is a progressive institution that is helping low-income people with their low prices, and that living wage campaigns, for instance, are actually hurting low-income people. So these are pretty conservative ideas, and I think it is important for people to understand that this is who Obama has chosen to take his advice from.
This is very interesting because, of course, he really slammed Hillary Clinton when it came to her tenure on the board of Walmart.
Yeah.
And he said he wouldn't shop there.
It's true. He said both of those things, and it is a political campaign, and we're seeing a lot of double talk on these issues. Austin Goolsbee, for instance, got himself into some trouble after he met with Canadian consulate officials, and they left that meeting with a distinct impression that he had told them that they shouldn't listen to what Obama is saying about NAFTA and renegotiating NAFTA for labor and environmental standards, because it's just an election campaign. So it would seem that perhaps we should take Obama's Walmart comments in the same spirit. But, you know, my message on...
And yet you have him speaking, Obama himself, being quoted in Fortune magazine after he had said that whole, well, what became a sort of little scandal there with Goolsbee going to the Canadian consulate at the time when he was going through the states where labor was stronger, where he was really slamming NAFTA, saying this wasn't true, that he was telling them, don't worry, it's just overheated rhetoric. And then he said that precise thing, Senator Obama himself, in Fortune.
That it was overheated rhetoric. Yeah, exactly.
That he supports NAFTA and free trade. And
it's, you know, it's shades of Bill Clinton's first campaign, where he also campaigned very actively about labor and environmental standards in NAFTA. NAFTA had already been signed, but it hadn't come into law. And then there was a turnaround. And there was a turnaround in the transition period after the election, but before he took office, where there was a sort of fateful meeting, and I think the fear is that some of the same people, like Rubin, responsible for Rubinomics, which turned into Clintonomics, which was the Democratic full-scale embrace of the ideology of privatization and so-called free trade, that this same sort of group of people are now surrounding Obama, and Jason Furman is a Rubin protege, and worked with him at the Hamilton Project, which is a sort of sub-think tank of the Brookings Institution, which emerged a few years ago to prevent the Democratic Party from embracing what they saw as populist economic policies, the centerpiece of which would have been a re-examine of the ideology of free trade, which is being discredited around the world.
So you have Obama on NAFTA, people perceiving that he's changing his position. And then you have the major issue of FISA, or even on his own website. And many
just to be clear on economics, I mean, I think what we actually saw with Obama is that he started pretty much at a conservative point on economic policy. And Clinton and the campaign with Clinton, because she was moving so far to a populist position, he then moved. And as soon as she dropped out of the race, he moved back. So I think there are some real points of disagreement, and I think that there are some places to point to a much more progressive outlook in Obama's roots, particularly on foreign policy, but I don't think economic policy is one of them.
He had called the free trade agreement in the debates with Hillary Clinton and with John Edwards a mistake. He called it an enormous problem. But now, with Fortune said, sometimes during campaigns, rhetoric gets overheated and amplified. My core position has never changed. I've always been a proponent of free trade, which you say actually is true.
And he appointed Jason Furman the day after Hillary dropped out of the race. Yeah. So it was. As I said, I really think he's moving back to actually where he started, with his first reaction, as I said, to the subprime mortgage crisis being, well, we can't keep low-income people from being evicted because we have the moral hazard of encouraging them to make bad loans, essentially blaming them for having accepted these mortgages in the first place.
So now you have FISA, and you're suing on this issue. But on December 17th, a press release from Obama's Senate office read, Senator Obama unequivocally opposes giving retroactive immunity to telecommunications companies and has co-sponsored Senator Dodd's efforts to remove that provision from the FISA bill. Granting such immunity undermines the constitutional protections Americans trust the Congress to protect. Senator Obama supports a filibuster of this bill and strongly urges others to do the same. Ultimately, of course, he supported the bill, and it just passed, and the telecommunications